Hi, Chowky. Thank you so much for providing me some time this afternoon. I've just come across a client in my caseload under the name of Jake, and he's currently presenting with anxiety symptoms. The some of the presenting symptoms in the initial assessment sort of provided perfectionism, self-doubt, difficult focusing around his work, and additionally, his goal himself is looking towards anxiety management. The long-term goal that I've got proposed at this point is sort of looking towards increasing psychological flexibility, as it seems that he's currently really overwhelmed with work. So regulating that emotion would be that sort of long-term goal, and additionally providing steps in the future for that. Now, the short-term goal, I've got looking towards three things. Firstly, normalizing anxiety, because it might be his first time accessing psychological help. Secondly, introducing the model, which is ACT. And then thirdly, and this is the most important, sort of providing or introducing diffusion, because once again, he is overwhelmed. So I want to regulate the anxiety. Now, the model, as you can assume at this point, I've chosen is ACT itself. So acceptance and commitment therapy. And the reason why I've sort of chosen it is that I had two train of thought at this point. Is this sort of leaning towards general anxiety or social anxiety? And so what I sort of came across looking at the DSM-5, looking at the text revised version, is the diagnostics of what the difference was. And it seems that Jake actually is presenting more with sort of a generalized holistic anxiety with multiple aspects in his life, such as daily situations, work, and health, rather than very situational specific, because it is, once again, outside of work as well. Now, from then, I had two train of thoughts. So whether I should take the CBT route or the ACT route. Now, CBT, once again, is looking towards that cognitive restructuring. Now, if Jake wants to overcome and actually take direct action towards his sort of anxiety itself, then CBT I might adjust. But additionally, looking at ACT, there's obviously the cognitive diffusion, additionally acceptance, more importantly than anything else. So those were the sort of the two starting points. To make my decision, I actually went into further research and I specifically looked towards sort of his condition, or not even his condition, just how perfectionism is linked with sort of the workplace itself. And what I actually found was that perfectionism actually provides both positive and negative outcomes, which I thought was surprising. I only thought it had negative outcomes. And that being said, um, the negative outcomes actually outweighed the positive outcomes. So the negative outcomes being failure avoidance, for example, was more prevalent and more impactful than positive outcomes such as motivation and engagement. So therefore, you do want to have a little bit of that. So if I can balance Jake's perfectionism, that would be ideal to actually still get that sort of positive outcome such as motivation and engagement. Now, I actually did further research looking at Jake's specific symptomology to find out if there was any sort of previous research around it, and I did. And it's the recommended sort of models to utilize, at least for the research I found, was ACTS. And so that was the determining factor itself. And some of the sort of benefits that it provided was sort of reduces that burnout, which it seems that Jake is going through at this point in time, and also improves his self-regulation strategies, which Jake seems to need at this point in time. So the outcome was to obviously ACT itself. Now, looking at further sort of manuals itself, I came across ACT in Steps manual by Oxford Clinical Psychology. Now, for the duration of the intervention itself, I'm planning to focus on three main points. So diffusion, mindfulness, and values. Diffusions, I want to specifically look at towards that first step, once again, to just regulate his anxiety because of the overwhelmingness and actually sort of separate the reality to his thoughts so that he can sort of process further information in the upcoming sessions. Now, secondly is mindfulness. So, to be able to utilize those skills and tools when he is getting that intensity again. And once again, values, looking at towards that sort of value-based sort of action or commitment, and then relating it to it once I build that rapport. CBT can be used later down the track, depending on how our progress goes. So I will recognize that more than anything else. Now, some of the factors that I was obviously aware of when sort of proceeding with this upcoming session itself, there are three client factors that I want to talk about. Firstly is perfectionism. The strength is that, as previously mentioned in the research, it can be a potential motivator, which is always great to see. A weakness is that he potentially may be resistant to change and have difficulties accepting the discomfort. So with these two, I actually plan to sort of once again start with that diffusion, such as the manual is suggested. And so in other words, separating his actual thoughts to the reality itself to actually provide that reality difference. Second sort of factor is high standards, and this is reflecting. So the first thing is his strengths, which reflects that he's very committed. He's got a strong work ethics. However, because of that, he has been very overwhelmed and has set unrealistic expectations of his progress. And so therefore I'm sort of implementing sort of acceptance strategies. We're sort of normalizing setbacks as well, than anything else, and maybe some self-compassion. His physical condition is the third factor. So this strength that he has is he is self-aware, which is amazing to see, which means that he might be open to do a dual approach of looking towards both his mental and his physical health, or at least improving both at the same time. The weakness is that he might just obviously have those cognitive difficulties to sort of focus and attend during his engagement with sessions itself. So consistently checking his condition and be mindful, and using even mindfulness techniques, to improve his focus during the sessions itself. Now, my sort of factors that I might be impacting for the next upcoming sessions, first thing is maintaining boundaries. So the strength of the boundary itself is providing that structured and effective environment for Jake to be in. But once again, because of his situation specific, I might sort of be not client orientated and actually do more a directive approach because he might be a bit lost and overwhelmed. And so I might fall into sort of a little bit of validation as well, which might be the problem. So what I plan to do is once again have these sessions with you, keep it structured and really be client orientated. So maybe ask open-ended questions and always reverting back to his situation and his sort of his thoughts as well. The second factor I had was balancing validation and challenges, or challenging him. The strength is providing obviously support through both empathy and additionally redirection. Weakness being unbalanced, or when it's imbalanced, so I should say, creating an environment that relies too much on validation or being too critical. So the proposed solution I have is actually counterbalancing. So when I do validate him, I also sort of challenge that as well. Or if I'm challenging you too much, obviously just take time to recognize what he's going through, maybe get his feedback. So having that counterbalance. The third thing is my clinical background. So as you know, I am obviously well-versed in CBT, and so ACT is relatively new. The strength can be that I can obviously have that professional guidance from my previous experience, but once again, my reliance on CBT may be overbearing. So the solution I want to do is sort of have these weekly supervisions, or at least every 2 weeks, if that's okay with yourself, and really being strict to the manuals at least, as best I can to deter away from the CBT techniques. Now, lucky last, I'm going to sort of go through step by step. So of the actual session I plan to do, first step is going to be this welcome and check-in, roughly 5 minutes. So pretty much just having introduction, just double checking to see if I've got the right information, maybe building rapport as well. And also checking his physical condition, because that's obviously been a factor that I need to be aware of. Step 2 is setting the stage for therapy. So the actual manual itself advised to sort of get this rapport building up by making sure that I'm aligned with what his goals and his thoughts of therapy is itself. So in other words, this goes to my sort of factor of setting those healthy professional boundaries or maintaining professional boundaries, because it will highlight both ends of what our expectations and boundaries are, which would be a really good and important sort of step to start off with, especially being the first session itself. Now, the third step is actually introducing ACT. So sort of outlining the overview of the ACT. So what is psychological flexibility? And then additionally emphasizing sort of, that internal experience and commitment to value-driven actions. And so basically looking towards sort of explaining, potentially diffusion, mindfulness, values, as all the processes go as well. So once again, this falls under factors of me sort of looking at creating that structure, and also just reminding myself for that clinical background that I'm actually looking at ACT rather than CBT. Step 4 is introducing diffusions. So I'm planning to use creative hopelessness exercise for about 20 minutes. So once again, that introduction, but also providing Jake to identify the patterns that lead to hopelessness and also create creative solutions, and also utilizing what we call the 2-game metaphor. And so once again, looking at the potential resistance and changes, whilst also, attempting that validation and challenges counterbalance. And finally, looking towards wrapping up the reflection, 5 minutes, which is summarizing key points, reinforming the insights, so getting his feedback, what he's learned from it, and then additional any feedback that he would like to sort of improve for future sessions itself. And additionally, setting some small tasks for the next week or to our next session itself, around diffusion, so that once again, we can regulate that anxiety. Okay, thank you so much.